Welcome to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast, where you get help and guidance through the chaos of parenting a child with anxiety or OCD. This show is for educational purposes and is not intended to replace the guidance of a qualified professional. Here's your host, child therapist, Natasha Daniels.
Well, hello there, and welcome to another episode of the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. Today, I want to talk to you about the difference between reframing anxiety thoughts, anxious thoughts, kids who have anxiety disorders, versus OCD thoughts. How do we talk to our kids about their anxious thoughts differently than we talk about their OCD thoughts? And why does it matter? It does, and we're going to talk all about that. But before we get started, I want to thank NoCD for sponsoring this episode. NoCD offers affordable, effective, convenient therapy, and they're available in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. And you can schedule your free 15-minute consultation to see if NoCD is the right fit for you and your child. Just go to treatmyocd.com. That is treatmyocd.com. I will also leave a link in the show notes. If you have been wanting more in-depth support, don't forget to get on our wait list for the AT Parenting community. We're going to be talking today about how to reframe anxiety thoughts versus OCD thoughts, and that's one of the many things that I help members in our community with. How do they talk to their kids about certain things? They can reach me in the forums, in our member forums, and I'll role play with them. Sometimes I'll even kind of script things for them about how I would say things, because our language and how we convey things to our kids does make a difference as far as how helpful it is and whether we can get them to open up or not. And you'll see in this episode how reframing anxious thoughts versus how to handle OCD thoughts is really important, and understanding the difference is key. So if you have been wanting more in-depth support, we do a ton of things in the AT Parenting community, including weekly live classes, monthly live support group calls for the parents, kids, and teens, $500 of access to my online courses for free, and direct access to me in the forums for my ongoing support. Join us at atparentingcommunity.com. Get on the wait list. We do open periodically, quietly, privately to the wait list only. You never know when that's happening. It may be right now. I don't know. Join us at atparentingcommunity.com. Okay, let's jump into this today. I do get this question a lot. I think parents don't ask me the question, but they tell me what they're saying to their kids, and they should be asking this question, because how we talk to anxiety is so different than how we talk to OCD. So I first want to go back and talk about the difference between anxiety and OCD in general. Anxiety and OCD are two different disorders. OCD is not a manifestation of anxiety. OCD is not anxiety, but just really bad. I've heard all of these things, by the way. I'm not making this stuff up. That's why it's really important that you find a mental health clinician who understands OCD, because when you are seeing someone who is not trained to assess or diagnose OCD, they may tell you these kind of things. They may tell you that OCD is just when anxiety gets really bad. They are two totally different disorders. Research has shown that anxiety and OCD show up differently physiologically in the brain. Anxiety is more focused, it's all over the brain, but more focused around the amygdala, and a very overreactive sensitive amygdala and neurotransmitters around that. OCD, a lot of research has been showing that it's more about the prefrontal cortex and the basal ganglia and the circuitry between those two things. And so physiologically, they are very different disorders. In the DSM, the Bible of diagnosis, they are categorized in different categories now. They are not under the same umbrella. OCD is not considered an anxiety disorder. So that's me on my soapbox, but that's not what this episode is about. But just to give you a little background on how they are very different physiologically and also therapeutically, we approach them differently. And so getting the right help does matter. Finding an OCD therapist does matter. If your child has anxiety and OCD, you want to find an OCD therapist, because an OCD therapist will understand anxiety, But an anxiety therapist who doesn't understand OCD will not know how to treat the OCD. And more often than not, we have kids who have co-occurring conditions. My kids have anxiety and OCD, and I have to know who I'm talking to at any given time to know how I'm going to respond. Because if I'm talking to OCD, I'm not going to respond in the same way that I would if I was talking to anxiety. This can make your head spin. I get it. You're like, oh my gosh, how am I supposed to know who I'm talking to? Well, once you really understand OCD, then you really can start to notice the difference. And also you can start to notice the difference by your child's reaction to whatever you offer them. Because when you are responding to OCD as it is anxiety, OCD will respond in an unsatisfying way. And I'm going to talk about that as we go through this episode, how you can kind of tell when you are trying to approach an anxious thought when it's really OCD. There are some kind of telltale signs that what you're doing isn't working because it's OCD. All right. So anxiety versus OCD treatment is a bit different. Like I said, most OCD therapists can also treat anxiety. I rarely have found an OCD therapist that won't treat anxiety, but it doesn't go both ways. So we want to talk about how we approach those things. When it comes to anxiety, there are extra steps with anxiety. Anxiety can be reframed. You can process anxiety. You can talk to your child about their anxious feelings, why they're having their anxious feelings, and get them to perceive their anxiety in a different way. Like, I have social anxiety. That's probably my number one anxiety issue. I've got other anxieties, but that's my number one. And I can talk myself through my anxiety. When I have to go somewhere that I don't want to go, I can cheerlead myself. And that cheerleading makes me feel better. I'm constantly cheerleading my own anxiety. If I have to navigate in a new city that I've never been to, I'm always like, Natasha, you can do this. You can just do it one step at a time. Just focus on your next step. Just get the car. Okay, you got the car. Now just plug in the address. Okay, you plugged in the address. Now it's like, just get to the hotel. Because those things used to be really overwhelming for me. And I have learned how to coach myself through those. When I'm having an anxiety attack, I start to notice it in my body, and I start to reframe my thoughts, and I start to think, okay, you're feeling anxious about this. What are the things that we can go do? And that is different than when you're having OCD. How you talk to yourself and problem solve is very different. So the first step is, with anxiety, we're going to reframe those cognitive distortions. The first step with OCD is we're going to just identify that it's an OCD thought. We don't tangle, we don't dance with OCD thoughts. It's like fire. You touch it, you're going to get burned. As a parent or someone who is trying to support someone with OCD, you touch that fire, trying to tame that fire, you're going to get burnt. With anxiety, you can touch that fire. You can get some water and you can try to put it out. You can control the fire. You can make a fire pit. I'm going too far with this analogy. You know what I mean? Like, you can work with that. With OCD, OCD will just laugh at you because OCD doesn't care about you reframing any cognitive distortions. OCD doesn't care about your problem solving. OCD doesn't care about any of that because a lot of times with people who have OCD, they know their thought is irrational, but they can't turn it off. That is the difference. With anxiety, you can problem solve. It's still hard, but there's movement in the dialogue. When you're talking to an anxious child and they're afraid to go to sleep at night and you say, what's the scariest part about going to sleep? Right? We can talk to the anxiety and they might say, well, it's dark and I'm worried there's something in my closet. Well, what do you think is in your closet? Well, I think there's maybe a bad guy in there. Okay, well, we've been home all day. How do you think a bad guy could have gotten in your closet? I was downstairs the entire day. That's true, right? So we're starting to talk about it. And what does your anxiety say about that? Well, I don't know. Anxiety says they can get through the roof. Well, how would they get through the roof? Right? They really wouldn't be able to squeeze through the roof. We don't have an opening in the roof. That's true. The anxiety sometimes just makes us worry about things that aren't really there. What can make you feel better right now? You can turn the light on in the closet. Okay, we'll turn the light on in the closet, right? And the next time you have this thought, we can think, oh, there's anxiety again. But how is my house safe? What keeps me safe? And so I'm reframing some thoughts. I'm reframing the anxious thought to think of it differently. For example, with me, with my social anxiety, I might say, oh gosh, I have to go. Let me try to think of something that's horrible. There's so many to pick from. I don't know. Oh, I have to go to this conference and there's nobody will be there that I know. It's going to be so uncomfortable. Or maybe no one will talk to me. For me, I try not to, actually, I'm going to give you a real one. That one's not a real one currently, but here's a good one. I was having this pain in my chest and I was like, oh, I feel like I'm such a hypochondriac and I don't want to go to the doctor because I feel like I go there and I complain about something, then they can't find anything. And then I'm sure they've got it written in my file somewhere. Natasha Daniels, she's a real hypochondriac. Just humor her, And so I have this paranoia, like, oh my gosh, like they're going to think I'm a hypochondriac. I can't go. So I had that thought. This was like a few months ago. I had that thought. And then I was able to work through that cognitive distortion. I was like, instead of making myself feel better and saying, oh, they don't think that. They're just there to support you. They don't have that in your file. They're not going to think that you're a hypochondriac. That's not how we really want to talk to anxiety. We want to reframe anxiety with kind of accepting some things and being able to sit with that uncomfortableness. And for me, in this particular scenario, it was saying to myself, okay, let's say for some bizarre reason that they're like, yeah, Natasha Daniels, like we're going to put a little red slip in her file. She's a hypochondriac. When you see her walk in, be like, whoa, hypochondriac. Does it matter? I mean, how is that going to impact me? Are they still going to order labs and do their due diligence as doctors? Yeah, it's a good practice. They will. Are they going to go post on Facebook or TikTok and be like, you got to hear about this. I've got this crazy patient who always thinks there's something wrong with her. Let me talk about Natasha Daniels. No, I don't think they'll do that. That would be weird. So what's the worst that can happen if I go there and they think I'm a hypochondriac? Nothing. Am I going to go have dinner with them on Friday night? Are they going to go share, tell everybody else, like Mean Girls, that I'm a horrible person? No. So does it matter what they think? Not really. So then I made the appointment. And then the pain went away like a week later after they ordered an MRI and an ultrasound. But whatever, sometimes pains go away. Do I care? No. So that helped me through my anxiety because I was able to walk through it. I was able to reframe my thinking. I was able to accept worst case scenario, even though it's far-fetched, and be okay with that because it's something I can survive. So that's just an example of reframing a cognitive distortion. With OCD, we do not do that. And we're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to talk about why we don't do that with OCD and what we do instead. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
It's time we put help directly in our kids' hands. Introducing Crushing OCD course for kids and teens.
It was way more helpful than all the other therapy we've ever done because we didn't really know what to do. So we weren't really doing it before. So the course helped to figure out what the exposures are and how to do them.
We're not in therapy and find it really hard to find an ERP trained therapist here. So we're currently with the public health service, but again, they don't seem to be trained in ERP. It's filled that gap that we don't have that was desperately needed.
This was really well timed for us to use between therapists and to help us get off to a good start with this new practice.
It was easy to use. I was able to do it from my phone or also on the computer.
There's different ages, so there were younger kids, there were teenagers, and so that was really nice too, to have a variety of ages where it wasn't just geared towards younger kids or older kids. It was a nice variety.
It's helpful for our kids to hear it from this third party as opposed to just us saying it.
I really like the offense and defense method. I love working on poking at OCD while it's sleeping. It makes it a little bit easier to do, and it's kind of fun. I'm planning on using it to work on my fear of like holding or touching batteries and stuff like that.
So it was really helpful, and I think a lot of other kids would like it. I thought that I was like the only one who had worrying about the weather and stuff. And then there was somebody else on there who worried about the same thing, which was really helpful.
Seems less scary to work on stuff now that I've watched this class, and I'm more interested to work on it.
I like trying to do more exposures still, and before I wasn't, I just didn't want to do them.
I've worked on some of my bigger compulsions and been successful.
I realized that it was helpful to do like the exposures. Before it was like really, really hard. It's still hard, but it's helpful to know that I need to do them.
Before there would be a lot of battles about it, so it is definitely less loggerheads.
Really, really good course and super helpful.
Definitely would recommend this. It's really easy to follow. It's nice bite-sized videos. I really like the worksheets that go along with it, and I think it's really helpful.
To learn more about this course and register your child or teen, go to atparentingsurvivalschool.com.
Welcome back. Okay, so before the break, we were talking about how to reframe cognitive distortions. And I gave you an example of my own social anxiety and different ways I work through that thought. With OCD, we aren't going to touch the thought. We aren't going to try to reframe the thought. When you do that, it falls flat because OCD is more often than not ego dystonic, which means it's not compatible with who you are or what you think or what you know. And because of that, when you try to rationalize with OCD and you try to talk someone out of their OCD thoughts, you wind up kind of frustrating them and letting them know that you don't fully understand OCD, because intellectually, most people, depending on your child's age and if they're autistic, sometimes there's a little bit more of an ego-syntonic issue where they are aligned with their OCD beliefs. But more often than not, and certainly as kids get older, there is a separation where they know rationally they've washed their hands 5 times. Their hands are raw. They know their hands are clean, but they don't feel like it's still clean. OCD is still bossing them around. Or they know there's no bird flying in the house getting bird poop on the doors, but they feel like there could be bird poop on the door handles. Or they know they're not going to try to, kill their pet, but they feel like they're going to. These are examples of OCD themes. And so you're not going to talk to OCD and say, well, I know you feel like you want to kill your dog, but really, are you going to really do that? What are the chances? And so let's just talk about that. Maybe you just keep the dog away from you, or let's keep the dog over here. That will feed the OCD. So the first step with OCD is getting them to just recognize, oh, I'm having an OCD thought. I'm sorry OCD is talking to you. That's OCD. That is really the first step. And the second step is getting them to ride the wave of an OCD thought without doing or avoiding what OCD wants them to do. So all the coaching that happens with OCD is more around tolerating the discomfort that's happening without scratching the itch. And so it's a lot of coaching of I'm sorry that OCD is making you feel that way, or I'm sorry OCD is wanting me to say something to you, or I'm sorry OCD is seeking reassurance from me, or I'm sorry that OCD is making that hard for you to do or touch or eat. And then it's getting them to recognize, what does OCD want you to do in this moment? So it's more coaching of the skills around OCD. What does OCD want from me in this moment? What does it want from you in this moment? What does it want you to avoid? What does it want you to do? Right? Those are the compulsions. OCD is bossy. It wants our kids to do or avoid something to get that brief relief. And our job is to help them through that, to help them recognize what OCD is wanting them to do, the compulsion, and for them to try to delay it and eventually ignore it and ride the wave of discomfort. That's the ultimate goal. With anxiety, there's an extra piece in that. With anxiety, there's that piece of reframing your thinking. When I reframed my thought around the doctor's office, it seemed ridiculous to me after a while. I was like, why am I worried about the doctor? I'm never going to, like, why do I care what they think? And so it took away some of that anxiety that was making me want to avoid going to the doctor. And so the reframing part is an extra step with anxiety. With anxiety, we're still going to encourage them to do brave things, to do challenges where they're walking towards discomfort. They're doing things that make them uncomfortable because it's something that they need or want to do. And with OCD, we do that as well through exposures, putting them in situations on purpose where they can practice feeling discomfort. But when the thoughts happen, we approach those differently, because when it's anxiety, we're doing that extra step. And when it's OCD, we're talking about the thought and how they're dealing with the thought and how the thought is really bothering them. And so we're talking about it, but we're not diving into the thought. Does that make sense? Now, sometimes we might, separate from a moment when our child is having an OCD thought, we might explore the core fear. We might talk about what does OCD say is the worst thing that can happen? Or what does OCD say will happen if you don't do that compulsion? And we're trying to get to the core fear because we want to set up really effective exposures, and we really want to target the head of the snake and develop effective exposures. I feel like I just did a podcast on that too. Let me just look. I batch these, and so sometimes I don't know what order. Actually, that was last week. I'm just looking at my list. I did talk about that last week. So if you're like, that's interesting, what does she mean by that? I just did a whole podcast episode 399, why the core fear matters in anxiety and OCD. So you can check that out and dive deeper on that one, because it does matter. So we are going to talk and explore our child's OCD thoughts in general when we're trying to figure out what their core fear is, what the theme is, what OCD is telling them. But day to day, when our child is having an intrusive thought or an intrusive feeling related to OCD, the way that we're going to help them through it is not to dive into the thought. So let's go through some concrete examples so you know what I'm talking about. Let's do OCD. I already just did an anxiety one. So let's say you have a child with contamination OCD and they're worried about germs and they feel like their hands are still dirty no matter what. And let's say they're worried about school. School is like ground zero for their contamination OCD. And let's say that they feel like there's a bunch of colds and viruses at school and people don't wipe their nose with a tissue and they're touching stuff and they think germs happen at school. And so school is like the grossest environment. And their core fear maybe is, I'm worried about getting sick and dying. Or maybe their core fear is, I'm worried about getting sick and spreading it to my family and my family dying and me being responsible. Those are two totally separate core fears, two totally separate OCD themes. One is harm OCD and one is contamination OCD around the fear of their own death, right? But we'd still have to go further. And what is the scariest part about dying? But that's for the other episode. You can go to the other episode for that one. But let's say they come home and they're worried they left their backpack out at the door and, somebody tripped on it and they're like, why did you leave your backpack outside? And they move it inside the corridor of the house. And now your child is freaking out. I'm just making this up, just as an example. And they're like, oh my gosh, you just brought in all the school germs and now they've floated into the house. Now, most kids aren't, articulate, but this is kind of an OCD thought. It's contaminated the entire kitchen now because the backpack is in the corridor next to the kitchen. And now I can't touch anything in the kitchen. Contamination OCD can spread like wildfire really fast. So if you say to your child, well, your backpack didn't touch anything in the kitchen. Your backpack's just in the hall. And germs don't just fly into the air and go around the kitchen. So what can you think about differently? Can you think, oh, that can't happen. That's not possible. That's not going to work with OCD because OCD doesn't care about your rational facts. OCD is not concerned about you debating with it. OCD just wants you to do what it wants to do. It wants you to avoid. And so OCD might say, you can't eat any food in here now. You can't touch the kitchen counter now. And you can't really go into this room without feeling like you need to go wash your hands because this room is dirty now. That's not rational thinking. And the person who has OCD often also recognizes deep down that that's not a rational thought. And you can't target that and try to rationalize with them or problem solve with them because most people already know that it doesn't make sense, but their brain doesn't care because OCD is so loud and so dominating that they just feel fear and paralysis and that they can't touch anything. And so the way that you're going to approach that is, I'm so sorry that your OCD is trying to take hold of the kitchen right now. And I'm sorry that OCD is trying to spread. And if we let OCD develop rules around what can happen in the kitchen, what do you think will happen? Right? So I'm walking them through this intrusive thought. Well, then I won't be able to eat here. Yeah. And OCD is going to take food away from you. And OCD has already taken so much away from you. That'll be really scary if we let this take hold. Right? So what does OCD want you to do right now? OCD wants me to go wash. OCD wants me to not eat here. Okay, so what's something that we can do to push OCD back? Well, I can go eat something, or I can delay washing. Now, obviously, you're not going to always get such a cooperative kid, but just for the sake of this role play, that's the kind of coaching we're going to be doing. We're not going to do the things that we would do if it was anxiety. We're not going to reframe their thinking, problem solve. Well, you know what? You don't have to touch the food. I'll go get it for you, and I can spoon feed it into your mouth. And that way, you'll be okay. And we can remove your backpack, and we can get Clorox wipes out, and we can sterilize the kitchen, and so it will reset everything. No, then you're participating in a compulsion. You're taking OCD's lies and you're making them truth by acting on them like they're a legitimate threat. And so our job as parents in that realm is to coach our kids and to get them to see it's OCD. Now, they're not willing to do it. That's a whole other story. But this episode is just about understanding the difference between reframing anxious thoughts and tackling OCD thoughts. When it's anxiety, we are going to get into the weeds. We are going to process that. So let me use another example just to kind of help you guys. Let's take another anxiety theme. Let's say you have a child who has perfectionism to the point where they're so worried. And you say, what's the hardest part, or what's the scariest part about not being perfect? Let's just make up an example. Let's say they're really stuck on needing to get really good grades. And we explore, because perfectionism isn't in every category. Perfectionism tends to be in specific areas. You don't have a child that wants perfection in every single area. Sometimes it's very potent in one area. So let's say it's academics. They're really concerned about their grades. They want to get straight A's. They get a 97 or a 98 and they're really concerned and they're panicky. So you say to that child, what's the scariest part about getting a quote unquote bad grade, right? This is getting to the core fear, episode 399. And they might say, well, I'm really worried that if I don't get a good grade, then I'm going to fail. And then if I fail, I'll fail out of high school. And if I fail out of high school, then I won't be able to get a job. If I don't be able to get a job, then I'm going to be homeless. And if I'm homeless, I won't have a good quality life. I'll just be living on the streets all by myself, starving, homeless. That's the core fear, right? The core fear might be homeless and alone. Now that I made that very simple, that might be many, many discussions with your child before you get to that core fear of and then what, and then what, and then what, right? And getting to that bottom of that rabbit hole. And so then I might say, let's say I have a child and they're like, oh my gosh, Mom, I got an 89 on this test. I got a B. It was my first B ever. And I'm so panicking. I'm going to flunk out of school. And then with anxiety, I'm going to dabble into their thoughts and their perceptions. And I might say things like, well, how many more grades do you have before the semester is over? I have 8. And how much does homework count for? 10%. So if you have 8 more grades and this is only 10%, is that really going to impact your grade, right? So doing the math. And let's say it did though. Let's just pretend that it did. You're in 5th grade. If you flunked out of 5th grade, would that mean that you wouldn't be able to get to college? Because you're in 5th grade, right? So again, I'm problem solving with them. I'm getting them to see the bigger picture. they're catastrophizing and saying, if I get an 89 on my homework, I'm going to flunk out of high school and I'm going to be homeless. And I'm bringing it down a notch, right? I'm getting them to see that it's one grade out of many, many grades you're still going to have. And by the way, you're in 5th grade. None of this counts. And that's the conversation I've had with a lot of kids, including my own kids who are perfectionistic and get really consumed with grades. When they're not even in high school, I'll say, this is all practice. None of this counts. Like, it's good for you to care about your grades, right? I mean, but these are kids that care too much. It's all practice. It's all about just you learning. You're learning how to do homework. You're learning how to pace yourself. You're learning. That's the ultimate goal of this grade right now. It's not about you going to college and getting a successful career. We're not at that stage right now. So we're reframing their cognitive distortions that say every grade, including this 10% homework assignment, is going to make me homeless. And even if they were in high school and it did count, we'd still talk about how, that's a big leap from getting an 89 to being homeless when you are in your 20s. There's a lot of space in between, and there's a lot of bumpers. I mean, I've said this to my perfectionistic daughter who's in college right now. I've said things like, you've got support. That's not going to happen to you. You have family, you have loved ones, because I want to engage in that worst case scenario and make that even more palatable. Like, that's not, even if the worst thing happened in your brain where you weren't able to get a job and everything was failing, you have a lot of love and support around you. And so you have family, you have foundations, you have security systems in place. So I'm addressing that core fear and I'm turning the volume down. When it's OCD, that's going to fall flat because OCD doesn't care about what things you're going to say. OCD is just bossy and it doesn't care about your rational discussions. So let me just use one more example in the OCD category just to give you another little flavor of what that would sound like. Let's use one that's a little bit harder. Let's use moral OCD. So moral OCD is having intrusive thoughts that you are a bad person, that you may have done bad things, or that you're going to do bad things. It's different for each person. And so let's say I have a child who is having intrusive thoughts that they are a bad person and that, let me try to think of a good example, that they may have cheated on their test. And so they come home and they're like, Mom, I think I cheated on my test. And they have moral OCD. So your guard is already up. You're like, I think I'm talking to OCD and not my child. Because your guard should be up when you know their theme. And your child's like, I think I cheated on my test. And you might engage them for a second because they are still kids and they still have issues, right? What makes you think you cheated on your test? Well, I just had this thought that maybe I looked over at my friend's paper when I was doing my test. Did the teacher say anything? No. Did your friend say anything? No. Do you think you looked? I think I looked, but I'm not sure. Okay, so that's always a red flag because OCD is never sure. It's like, I think I did, but I'm not sure, right? That's not cheating, right? That's not. And so at that point, I'm recognizing this is OCD and I'm not going to engage with actually problem solving. I'm not going to say, well, let's talk to your teacher and see if she thought that you cheated, or let's go talk to your friend and see if they cheated, or, you shouldn't look at your friend's paper. And so next time, maybe they need to sit you somewhere else farther away so that you don't have the temptation to look at someone else's paper. I'm not going to do that if I already know my child has OCD, that they have moral OCD, and one of their themes is cheating. I'm not going to go there because I'm going to be fueling the fire of OCD. And so very different than anxiety, I'm going to say, I'm sorry. And let's say I named OCD. Let's say we named it Mr. Bossy, but you can also just personify it by saying OCD. I might say, I'm sorry OCD is making you worry about this. I wonder if you think that maybe it is an OCD thought, because we want them to connect the dots. I don't want to just say that's your OCD, but I want to connect. I'm sorry, that sounds like, I wonder if that, your OCD is making you worry about this, and getting them to connect the dots and identify this is OCD. And then they might say, well, Mom, do you think that's cheating? Do you think I'm a bad person? Right now, we're in the middle of them trying to do a compulsion with me. They want reassurance. They want me to tell them they didn't cheat or that they're okay. And that is the compulsion that we participate in. And so instead of engaging in that, like we would with anxiety, where we would talk about it, we would try to problem solve, I'm going to say, I'm sorry that your OCD is trying to talk to me. And I know it feels uncomfortable that you're having intrusive thoughts that you cheated. But if I answer and we process this, I'm just going to be fueling your OCD. So I wonder, what would you do what does OCD want you to do right now? Well, OCD wants me to get reassurance. OCD just wants me to tell me that I didn't cheat. And what do we need to do? We don't want to feed OCD. And so instead, we have to do the opposite, which is sit with the discomfort. Now, the conversation doesn't go smoothly. I know this, but I'm just giving you a very quick example, and so I'm speeding up the process. Normally, you're going to get a child that's very upset. They want you to feed the OCD. They want you to just say that they didn't cheat. And so it becomes this battle because you're not feeding the OCD. But what you are doing is you're identifying that it's OCD. You're helping them see that it's OCD. You're not feeding OCD, and you're getting them to see the ultimate goal, which is to sit with that discomfort of that idea that they cheated without scratching any itch and getting any validation that they didn't cheat, because they didn't, and it's an intrusive thought. And so that's the difference between an anxiety thought and reframing the anxious thought and what we do as far as coaching when it comes to OCD. So I hope that you found that helpful. I'm just trying to give you like little short areas to focus on when we're talking about OCD and anxiety, and how to fine tune the nuances of how we approach and how we talk to our kids with anxiety and OCD, because those do make a very, very big difference. Like I said at the start of this episode, if you want in-depth support, if you're like, oh my gosh, that's interesting, and I wish I could just get you on tap, you can actually. You can join the AT Parenting community. We have a wait list right now. You can join at atparentingcommunity.com. Like I said before, we open to the wait list periodically. We don't announce that. We don't publicize that. And those moments do happen, and they might be happening very, very soon, if not already. So get on the wait list and join us, and you can reach me in the forums, and I can walk you through these kind of dialogues and discussions. You get $500 of my courses for free. You get access to those for free, and you get a beautiful, loving community of parents who are in the trenches with you. And we do weekly Zoom classes, monthly support group calls, or all sorts of fun things. So join us at atparentingcommunity.com. Okay. If you are enjoying the podcast, don't forget to hit a star or write a review. I really appreciate that. I'm having a hard time talking today. Have you noticed that? I wanted to read one of the reviews that one of you left, and I appreciate it. Jasper's mama. I can't remember if I read this one already. I don't think I did. But she wrote, best episode ever, episode 390. I feel like I might have read this. I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to read one more. I never want to leave reviews. I figure everyone else has already said the things I'm thinking. I listened to podcast 390 and had to stop cleaning a bunch of times to make notes to myself, so I wanted to leave a review. I love the idea about how to swoop in properly, learning to manage instead of fix, and that I need to check my emotional status first. So much great information. We got this. Thank you for that, Jasper's mama. I'm pretty sure I read that last time. So I also want to thank Eves76, who wrote a wealth of knowledge. I discovered this podcast from a recommendation in today's Parent magazine, and I've spent countless hours catching up on the wealth of knowledge these episodes provide. I am so glad that I found this resource. It helped me recognize that my child was seeing a therapist who did not practice ERP and somewhat dismissed my fears around the OCD things I was seeing. The information in the podcast gave me confidence to recognize the OCD themes and to seek out an ERP therapist who we are both now seeing, and hopefully we are on the right path now. If not, I will know to recognize that as well. Thank you so much for the time and effort. It has made a definite difference for me and my family, and after listening to many hours, it feels like you're a friend as well. Oh, I like that. Good luck to you and your kids in their struggles as well. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I love to hear when people get some knowledge from my episodes and are able to find qualified therapists because of it. The more we are educated, the better we'll be able to spot the effective therapists and the non-effective therapists. So I'm really happy to hear that, Eves, that you're with the right therapist, because the wrong therapist can make a huge mess in our kids' lives with OCD. So if you're finding the podcast helpful, don't forget to leave a review, and maybe I'll be reading your review next time. Probably will. Don't forget to find the sparkle in everything you do, and I'll talk to you again next Tuesday. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the AT Parenting Survival Podcast. To get additional support raising a child with anxiety or OCD, visit Natasha's online school of on-demand classes at atparentingsurvivalschool.com.